Well, now here we are, and it's not Monday afternoon. It's not even Friday morning. This is midweek because we have a special guest today, myself and Pat, and we're delighted to welcome Ray Bassett, who, as you probably know, is a former ambassador to Irish ambassador to the Bahamas and to Canada. So welcome, and thank you, Ray, for taking the time to talk with us today.
Thank you, Jude. Thanks for having me.
Okay, now you will be grilled by Pat. Do you want to kick it off, Pat?
Afternoon, Ray. We were talking with myself and Jude. It's a topic that comes up regularly because it's obviously a hot topic. Is this the recent report by Marie Anderson, the ombudsperson or ombudsman, apparently is the correct term, about collusion? And I was watching Jude and Ray and Jude. I'll just tie it up. The growth of Sinn Féin is a big topic on Monday night on RT. And one of the things that I think that a lot of Southern audiences don't get and have never got is that there's definitely a tie-in the nationalist community about this whole security thing. That is why so many people, in my opinion, have gone to support Sinn Féin, is this very issue of collusion. And collusion is a major issue, still a major issue. So how do you think, Ray, that there is any way that the British government and the Irish government will actually grasp the tail and do something about it?
Well, I think that, they would see collusion very heavily in a more historical context that it existed right through the Troubles. It's clear from the evidence, particularly the evidence by the various ombudsmen or ombuds, whatever the plural of ombudsman is, particularly Nuala Loan's work and Sam Pollock in her office, uncovered collusion and brought it to light on a scale which I don't think anybody in the Irish government, and certainly, when you listen to Michael Nates and you listen to other people who are ministers in Britain, said that they didn't know that the scale was so great. And it's obviously it was played a far greater role in the whole period of the Troubles than the Irish or British government were either prepared to look at or prepared to admit, and that it was a major destabilizing effect on confidence in the community. It is overwhelmingly was collusion with loyalist paramilitaries, but there was collusion with Republican paramilitaries, including in the killing of Notar Antonio. So it destroyed confidence and essentially ethics within the various security services. And remember, collusion did not occur just with the RUC. Collusion occurred, in the case of Scappaticci with the army and with the MI5. So it was far greater than we thought it was, or that we were prepared to admit. And to be honest, at the time when I worked in the Irish government, during periods people didn't want to know because the primary, opponent was the Republican movement, and anything which gave succor to the Republican movement was obviously suspect. So even if people raised this with inside government, they'd be a brave person. That's a bit of a ramble, but it gives some of the background to it.
I vaguely recall one of the first times I thought the Irish government would do nothing, and I think it was you gave it to me. It was an investigation into Pat Finucane, the killing of Pat Finucane. And I remember you saying to me, I thought it would be dismissed. And I remember you saying, no, Pat, there's considerable evidence of collusion involved in the killing of Pat Finucane. That's going back quite a few years.
It is. And in fact, I had a conversation with Peter Corrie later in Canada when he retired to Canada. And he didn't give me details on it, but he said he had read material and papers which said, all he would say, it was very, very bad. And I asked him how, of course, the obvious question is, how high did it go up? And he just said, I don't want to go into it, I'll be breaking confidences, but it was very bad. But we were aware of collusion because there was just too much evidence there of patrols disappearing outside certain nationalist areas and before an assassination and that. But the level and the scale of it, and I think, is a bit shocking. And the fact that, increasing evidence that, in the importation of the South African arms, that elements of the state may have played a role. And those arms were used very heavily in the killing of quite a few people, particularly people in South Belfast.
Ray, do you think that the British state can afford to, really investigate these things and open them up, because the trail leads too near to Downing Street?
Well, that's the $64,000 question, Jude. How high up did it go? But no one has managed to point to the very top. And to be quite honest, from working in government, I doubt there was any evidence of that. Simply because even if it did exist, hard evidence wouldn't exist. Nobody would actually write that down.
Yeah.
But then again, there's clearly stuff in the Finucane case, particularly, that they don't want to come out. Now, in the immediate aftermath of the Corrie investigations, where he recommended a public inquiry for 5 out of 6 cases, 5 out of 6 particular cases, I really think everybody should have gone with that inquiry, because if there was ever going to be an inquiry, it was in the aftermath of the first nationalist acceptance of the police and things like that. And I think the longer we get away from it, the less likely the UK government is to allow that type of inquiry. I think in the end, Jude, most of the people have gone on, and there'll be very few people in actual positions of authority today who would have been directly involved in what we call, what Marie Anderson calls collusive behaviour during the Troubles. So in the end, it'll probably come out, maybe 100 years time. But
but Ray, just to follow up on one thing you said, I heard a guy a former RUC officer on Talkback quite recently, where he said that Anderson hadn't produced any evidence that would constitute a criminal case that are charging. But the very people who were there looking after the evidence was the RUC. And she said there was clear evidence of destruction of evidence and clear evidence of destruction of records. So, is that a defense to say we destroyed the evidence, but you can't charge us, so there's no case?
I think if there was evidence that material which is useful for the case was destroyed, that's a criminal offence. And also, as in terms of the definition of collusion, it's very hard to, collusion is not an offence, but it covers a huge range of offences. And as almost every judge has said, omission is also an offence. The fact that you do nothing it doesn't mean that you didn't engage in collusion. Even, for instance, if you didn't investigate properly, that is part of a collusive behaviour. And collusive behaviour was much more widespread and much more endemic in the system than we know about. I mean, during my time in Belfast and where I had a lot of dealings with security services, there was close, I wouldn't say war, but there was a continuous disagreement and aggression between several parts of the police force. Where CID kept on feeling that they were being trumped by special branch. And in the end, and I know one or two particular cases where the CID were basically, more or less telling you where to look as a way to, thwart the special branch, because they were often left with pick up the pieces after the special branch. Within the police force, there seemed to be two groups of people: one people who loved the special branch and one people who hated the special branch. And there was a lot of antagonism between the two, and I think the CID people felt that that they were investigating stuff with hands tied behind their back. And as I say, once or twice they would give a hint that maybe if you did a bit of discovery in this area, you might find something that would be useful. So they were sniping at each other.
But the history of the Troubles has shown that again and again, when some atrocity is committed, whether it's Bloody Sunday or whether it's the Ballymurphy people or whatever, or Pat Finucane, that people who perpetrated these things, if they are British or British soldiers, they will not be punished. By and large, that's been the case. So what is the point really of trying to kid yourself that you're going to get justice in this case of collusion itself?
Well, I think all families want to know the background. I mean, one thing when you're dealing with bereaved families and that, even people who are years later, obviously they would prefer that justice was brought, but they really often want to know why. Because remember, in a lot of the collusion cases, totally innocent people were killed. Were those people killed because the army were protecting, say, an agent inside the IRA, or were they protected? And families really want to know the truth. People have suddenly they found a son of theirs or a daughter of theirs were killed, and there's no logical reason whatsoever. And there is a story behind it, and they're really trying to get at that. And I think it's very important for families to get to the truth if they can, even if a conviction is further down the line, or is less likely. And I think it doesn't bring solace, but people want to know why these things happen.
But is it the why, or is it how far up the chain of command that this killing goes?
Well, I think there was a culture where some of the special branch people were told, and we had it the same in the Republic with the heavy gang, was just get results. Don't come back to me with talking such and such. I just saw somebody who was interviewed in some of the miscarriages of justice in the Republic. Their superiors didn't tell them go out and beat the living daylights out of thing, but don't come back without a confession. Yeah. So collusive behavior is actually which Marie Anderson used, a very good description. And people who do that are guilty just because they didn't say plant evidence or something like that. They under junior officers, they placed undue pressure to do things that they wouldn't have done under normal circumstances. So, Jude, maybe there is a smoking gun there, and the fact that so many files have been redacted and removed, maybe there is, that people got so confident within the system that they could be very open with each other. But I don't know is the answer, and your chances of getting it is going to be very slim. I mean, we still haven't got the full details of British files on the Dublin Monaghan bombings, for instance.
Yeah. Jude, can I ask you a question, because you're involved in this for a very long time? Do you seriously think there's any point, to follow on from Ray, at this stage, even right? Everybody's demanding in the nationalist community that there be some sort of legacy issue dealt with by the British government. But if the evidence isn't there, if it's redacted, if it's been messed around with, here we are 40, 50 years down the track. What is the point of even attempting to hold a legacy inquiry or a truth and reconciliation sort of process? Will anybody get any answers? And judging by past behaviour of the British state?
Well, certainly, if you judge it by the past behaviour of the British state, you'll never get it. I really don't believe.
So what's the point then, Jude?
Well, he says that he believes it's because the victims want to know why this happened rather than who did it. Why were innocent people who, I mean, if you take the Glenanne gang, for example, a lot of the people that were killed by them were, somebody said they were actually more like SDLP voters, that it was an effort to sort of squash this rising Catholic middle class that was emerging. One of the big examples was guy used to play for Tyrone, Jim, what was his name? Oh, can't think of his name. He used to play centre halfback for Tyrone, lovely player. But he had set up business and he was doing reasonably well. And he was killed in his car in his own driveway as he came back from somewhere with his wife and his daughter. He was a prime example, I thought, of this kind of Catholic who was beginning to make progress within society and beginning to, I suppose, find a place in the middle class.
Yeah. Ray, do you think it's there? The reason I'm asking the question, I think it's a waste of time. I really genuinely do. Now, I understand the point you made about the families made, but Ray, as far as I can see, there'll be nothing of any import produced on the British side. Right, there was roughly, I was chatting to a Republican I know quite well there recently. He said there was upwards of 10,000 Republicans processed through the courts. He said there was at most 10 members of the security forces did time. Two of them were guardsmen, and the judge made sure they were being done. He made sure the public knew they were being done for murder. They spent less than 4 years in jail. When they got out, they were reinstated back into their regiment and promoted So, like, against the background of that, do you seriously think that the Tory party or anybody else in power in Britain, like, would willingly hold an inquest and an inquiry or a whatever, or a process?
Well, to be honest, you saw the recent proposed legislation on amnesty for all. There isn't much of an appetite in Britain. The people who are driving this are, of course, the victims and their families, and that's very understandable.
Which I totally agree
there
with.
There will be a huge desire in Britain to essentially say, let's draw a line under the sand. And to be honest, that Good Friday negotiations, there were serious discussions about an amnesty. And surprisingly, who was for them and who wasn't against them. I'm not going to decide, but some people now who are demanding it were actually people who were quite favorably disposed towards it. But the point that really is that that was a particular time in history. That has moved on that. Remember, after the Troubles which led to the settlement in 1921-22, there was an amnesty bill in 1923, which wiped out all the offences committed during that period. And in a way, the release of prisoners was also an attempt at moving towards an amnesty. The actual British government official at the time said that it was the British government who successfully opposed the idea of calling a halt to all trials and that, and said the British public won't wear it, was his actual description of it. Well, we've moved on a few years. The British public have lost complete interest in this subject. And to get the British government, particularly a Tory government, to move on it, and to be honest, the chances of getting Keir Starmer for it is about as strong. Let's be honest. There may be a degree of play in politics, but I think it would be very difficult to persuade the British government to move on a major way on investigations. They may do into legacy issues like the historical inquiries team, and they've been very useful and produced a lot of material. But a sort of an omnibus investigation as to how high up this went and all, maybe it happened, but it's very difficult to see it at this stage.
Okay, I'm keeping my eye on the clock here, Ray and Pat. Would it be okay if we moved on to the other
absolutely.
topic I'd like to talk to? Well, one is, as Ray reminded me, he's running for the Shannon in a by-election, and I'd like to know why he's running and what sort of platform he's running on. And the other thing, if we can get time now, they cut us off. Remember, Pat, when we're talking, we can go on forever. But they will cut us off after 40 minutes. And if that happens, we either leave it at that or I, phone you up again and restart. But it'd be better, I think, we try to get it all onto this. Which would you, will we talk about your Shannon bid first?
Sure.
So what is your platform?
Well, my platform is that I decided to stand because I don't think people in the Republic have been getting much of a choice. And there's such a sameness about the political parties. I mean, I'm standing on the basis that I want to keep Ireland as an independent state.
That's the South of Ireland.
All the parties, including Sinn Féin very recently, are moving in the direction of a federal state. I mean, I just do not want us to give away the powers that we've got left, whether it's taxation, whether it's joining a European army, or whether it is giving over whole reams of health responsibility to Brussels. I mean, we spent 700 years trying to become an independent state, yet they're running to actually hand over the powers that our ancestors fought very hard to get. I agree totally with cooperation between sovereign states, but the idea that we're talking about at the moment about reducing VAT on fuel, or we can't do that because the European Union won't let us. I mean, who gave away those powers in the first place?
Ray, could it be argued, Ray, that you're the Nigel Farage of the Republic of Ireland?
No, it couldn't be argued, because I accept that there is very little chance of Ireland moving outside the European Union. But what I'm really playing is that we've got to reform the European the European Union, so that it actually becomes more of a collection of states that pull together. I mean, there's some very good aspects like the Erasmus program, like some of the environmental programs. But, do we really need to sort of have Europe trying to punch its weight abroad? Why don't we have an intervention force? Because the Americans are pulling out of Afghanistan, maybe we should be going in. That sort of, there just isn't enough debate about the way we're heading.
There isn't any. Like we don't really have a choice, surely. I mean, the South you're talking about, and let's hope the North as well. But you really don't have a choice about leaving. You're not saying that Ireland should do an Erexit, the same as Britain did a Brexit.
Not at this particular, but we do have choices. For instance, we chose to join PESCO. Denmark didn't join PESCO, which is the sort of military cooperation.
Yeah, but you're saying work within.
We decided to join the Euro, which brought us the economic crash.
All these things within, Ray, all these things within, you're inside the tent, you would say, trying to affect change rather than being outside the tent.
But we're not affecting change. We're quite the opposite. Every time they bring forward a new proposal, Ireland's at the front of it. We want to be at the centre of Europe. Look, Ireland is a North Atlantic island. Our neighbour to the west is Canada. Our neighbour to the east is Britain. We've got to reflect both our geography, our history, and we can't sort of say that we're exactly the same as Slovenia or Croatia. We have to have a relationship with Europe which reflects the fact that our most important neighbour is the United Kingdom. Our most important export market is the United States. I honestly believe that a lot of the sort of very, very, federalist European things is almost self-interest of people involved in it. And I think we have tended in the past to get crushed when we make very, very bad errors of judgment. And I'm afraid there seems to be very little kind of debate about basics, about what are we doing here.
Yeah. But the south of Ireland is a very small player, whether you like it or not. I mean, the south of Ireland is puny compared to most of the big states in the EU. Now, that's just a fact. I presume
the southern economy is the 43rd biggest in the world, which is out of 140. So it's not tiny. And like the European, and it's the same
say that
size
again,
as
Ray. Say that again. The south of Ireland's economy.
The Irish economy is about the 43rd largest in the world. It's bigger than the Pakistani economy. It's bigger than a lot of economies. So
how does it rate in the EU? How does it rate in the EU?
Population.
How does it rate?
This idea that it's always feeble is something that's been put forward on the basis you don't have a choice and to do everything that other countries of our size does. Norway's not a member of the European Union. Denmark goes in and basically works the economic side, but doesn't get involved in the military side or didn't give up its own currency.
Hold on, Ray, we're 2% of the population of Europe. So how does we're 2% of the population
of the EU, Pat, not Europe.
Of EU. Sorry, I knew you were going to say that actually. Right, but how does 2% wag the tail of the other 98%?
We don't want to wag the tail, but what we want to do is have a good relationship, as other countries have. Look at Iceland, for instance. Iceland is only 300,000 people, but Iceland is a very good standard of living, and you don't have to sell everything. That's the point I'm saying. We should be in favor of decentralizing power, not centralizing power. The more centralization of power, the less the average citizen has in influence.
I would tend to agree with you, Ray, but the two countries you cited, or three countries you cited, they're not in the EU. Are you suggesting that Ireland should get into a position like Norway or like Iceland?
Well, Denmark is in the EU, and we joined with them. And its population is about half the size geographically of Ireland, but it's about the same size as the Republic in terms of population, about the same size as the Republic. I just want us to, and I regularly found this when I was inside the government service, that when proposals come up, that we look on it also from a national point of view. Yeah, I remember when we were talking about the Lisbon Treaty. The Lisbon Treaty was a particularly bad treaty for Ireland. It helped to bring about Brexit. It also greatly reduced Ireland's voting power inside the European Union. And I remember asking one of the delegates, I said, why would we support this? And he says, but it's good for Europe. I said, yeah, I know that. It's good for people who want to centralize in Europe. But he said there wasn't one single argument in favour where we came out of it better. And yet we were selling this to the public. And I just think we need to be more honest when it comes to that.
How do you explain then the fact that it is so popular among the population of the South?
The Lisbon Treaty was defeated. You see, it's popular in general. But when you sort of say, are you in favour of the fact that we only get 15% of the fish off our thing? Oh, no. Are you in favour of Ireland joining a European army that's going to intervene and cause mayhem around the world? No. Are you in favour of the European Union taking over your taxation policy? No. Are you in favour of when you go through individual policies? Now, the reason the European Union is so popular in Ireland is because the European Union has been in row with the UK very heavily, and that has influenced it. And it's interesting that since the Brexit, the support for the European Union in Ireland has dropped by about 10%. It was up in the 90s. Now it's just touching 80%, which is very high, and I agree with that. But we were transference. My enemy's enemy is my friend. But we should be much more interested in looking at each proposal separately and deciding, is this good for us? Not if it's good towards creating a European superstate.
Well, it's certainly clear.
Jude, how long have we left?
Oh, no, I wouldn't say we'd be lucky to get 8 minutes, I would say.
Okay, I'll shut up.
I think in a way, Ray has put together the two things, the Brexit question or the Irexit question and his own running for the Shannon very nicely. They both have dovetailed. But listen, Ray, are you saying, I mean, there's no doubt about it, as you've implied, that the EU is moving closer and closer to being a kind of a super state. Yes. Now, is there a day coming when Ireland will have to decide if it's going to be part of that super state or if it's going to move outside and continue to try to be an independent nation or semi-nation, given the fact that it's occupied at present?
That comes up on proposals every day. And the point is that, the alternative argument doesn't get put into the paper. I mean, the Irish Times didn't even mention me as a candidate. I mean, there is an amazing level of fear. As I said, when I started writing for and I told Pat this, when I started writing for the Sunday Business Post, a former Irish government minister went to see the owner of the paper to ask him to stop it. You cannot have a person writing these type of things because, basically the public aren't able to take this information. And I just find this, frog marching us in a certain direction. And to be quite honest, Jude, if you look at Ireland in the 1904, 1906, 1909, it was the same thing about the empire. We're too small. You can't run yourself. The economic advantages of the empire are so great. It is exactly the same thing. I want us to be, as Tone and as Connolly said, an independent state. I want us to be very close and work close with your. But I don't want a non-elected official in Brussels suddenly decided to put a land border in Ireland over the back seats. That person should never have that type of power. Okay. But we've given it away.
Okay, I'm
just to follow on from that, Ray. Let's move it back to home territory. What do you make of the protocol and the reunionists? Rephrase it. The DUP bringing down Stormont. Now that the EU's role in our lives is quite clear. The EU's affecting, well, Brexit affects it, but the EU's got a role in this. So do you think that there's a resolution that can be reached that the DUP will live with and that Europe will live with?
Well, I think the DUP it's obviously a party, an electoral stunt.
Absolutely.
To bring back. But I think we do accept that there is alienation within the loyalist unionist community. But I think the unionist parties need to show leadership. The protocol is not going. Nobody's pressing on the protocol. But we all have a huge interest in making the protocol as small and as less intrusive as possible. If we started on that basis, I think we could get a solution. Remember, there was always a border between Northern Ireland and Britain in terms of animal foodstuffs and things like animal products and things like that. Let's get back to the point where we should be, make it as small as possible. But also the European Union has introduced a whole series of blockages to Britain, which is not necessary at all. And we should be at the forefront of sort of saying, we do accept that British, health standards and medicines and things like that are good enough for the European Union. They haven't even deviated, but we're putting up barriers all over the place. It's a bit like, if Scotland became independent, you would expect England and Wales to be quite nasty to them for a period of time. We want to get past the nastiness and sort of say, look, we can pull together here. Don't introduce, restrictions because they're not in the club anymore, that you don't put in for New Zealand and other places like that.
There was a report last night, Ray, that laid out the figures in terms of increase of trade between North and South and how that has flourished as a result of Brexit and as a result of the protocol, I suppose. Do you think that the unionists are right to be fearful of increased economic integration within the island of Ireland?
No, I think there's two things about those figures. One, the level of trade between North and South was artificially low for historical and various other reasons. The fact that, was made difficult. The second point I would say is those figures probably exaggerate the increase because so much of the trade was going on without anyone noticing. If I took a shipment of scrap metal from Dublin up to Belfast, nobody saw it, but they're noticing it much more now. And I think it's a very, very good idea that there was much greater trade. I don't want to see barriers between this island and the island in Britain too. But I don't think, there was a lot of people, and remember Dennis Rogan, who was chairman of the Ulster, and people like George Quigley, and they were calling for an all-island market. 7 million people in Ireland now, and it's a reasonable sized market, and it would be much better if people were trading on the basis of the 7 million rather than 2 million in the north and 5 million in the south. So I'm all for economic integration.
Yeah, but many unionists would see that, and if you look at historical precedents, they would see that as a forerunner for political integration, for political Irish unity.
Is
that wild fear? Is that exaggerated in your part?
And there's nothing wrong at all with people aspiring either to United Ireland or want to keep the Northern Ireland inside the United Kingdom. I do not think that extra trade, extra links, and extra interactions north and south or east west threaten anybody other than people who want to go into a larger.
Right, but you've just been talking about the EU, which started out as a trading organisation and very rapidly became one with political overtones and is working towards a super state. Would the same thing not apply in terms of Ireland on a much smaller scale?
No, because all the political developments are subject to, obviously, a political agreement. But I think the European Union made major mistakes by moving towards a federal state. They lost Britain, the second biggest economic power inside the European Union. They've caused problems with, Hungary and Poland and various other things. Europe isn't a natural member state, and the only reason people are bringing it together is so that they feel Europe can punch its weight around the world. But I don't want us to be punching anybody. So I think we pull together economically. The more trade we have with with Germany or the Benelux, brilliant. But why do people feel threatened by?
But Ray, hold on. I've heard you making that speech before, and it sounds good until you start thinking about it. Like, well, back in the day, 83% of I actually did economics for me leaving certain. I remember 83% of our exports were mainly agriculture, and they were all to the UK. They controlled the mechanism of the pricing and everything else. Yes. So a lot of people, a lot of our people lived in poverty, and emigration was widespread. Right? We joined the EU, and for all its faults, our lifestyles and standards increased dramatically. And the EU, Jude asked you the question earlier on, many people, even they don't like a lot of the EU, they will still say, we got a better deal from the EU than we got from the UK. So they're, right now they're going, if the choice is Belfast or Brussels, they're going to go for Brussels.
But Pat, you're talking about Ireland in the 1950s and early 60s is not there today. I mean, Denmark was in the same position as Ireland, but it wasn't poor. It was a lot of it was to do with history and choices. And the only reason Ireland joined the European Union was because Britain joined it. And if you read the government documents, we have this very, very good civil servant called Whittaker trying to tell the Irish government, you've got to be pro-European because you've nothing to give them. So we're going to be the most pro-European. And he was selling it like snake oil. But the problem is they've swallowed this and they're going back to why were we so pro-European?
Yeah.
Ireland will never go back to the sort of poverty position it was in the 50s and 60s. And that was a lot to do with ourselves as well as to do with Britain.
Yeah,
not every country in Europe
the commonly
was
maidens
like
dancing at the crossroads.
if we only sold to Britain, it was because we had a very, very uneducated population, and we had very poor economic policies. We went in protectionism, and if you look at economic growth in the Republic in the 60s, it was actually faster than it was in the 70s. We were coming out of it anyway.
Sorry, Ray, we've just got 2 minutes left. I'm going to ask a quick question. If you can make your answer short, so Pat can get the final one in. You said that the only reason Ireland joined the EU was because Britain joined it. Yes. Now that Britain's come out of it, would the logic of that argument not be that Ireland should come out too?
No, but we should realise that we need to maintain good relations with both. We're not in a position to move outside the European Union at the moment because we rely very heavily on American FDI, and our connections with the European mainland is all FDI. So if the European Union goes to clobber our tax rate, there isn't any great reason because we don't send a huge amount of our SME products. We don't send an offer from our native industries to the European mainland. That's the point I'm making. And the biggest change in Ireland was the Free Education Act, and I'm a great beneficiary of myself. It was Donald O'Malley who changed Ireland more than anyone else.
Okay, Pat, do you want to ask a final question?
Jude, one last question. If Arlene Foster and what do you call him, Sir Geoffrey, welcomed the protocol originally, saying they saw great opportunities. Here, Ray, quick answer. Why do you think they have changed their tune totally now?
Because I think there was a reaction inside the unionist community, and also because the sort of hard Brexiteers in Britain went against it. So the atmosphere changed, and and also their own political support was drifting away. So this was an opportunity to galvanise political support.
Yes. Jude, you better wrap it up. We have less than a minute.
Okay, we have exactly less than a minute. Less than a minute. Ray, thank you very much. It's a pity that this damned thing doesn't go for at least 2 hours because I could certainly ask you questions. But thank you for coming and best wishes. And I will vote for you. I'm going to come out now and say it. I'm going to vote for you for the Seanad, even if you choose to destroy Ireland.
Best of luck.
Vote early and often.
Okay, thanks very much, Ray.
Good luck, Ray. Cheers.